Awesome. Thanks, Corey. So good afternoon, everyone. At least it's afternoon here in Atlanta, and it's finally summertime. So hope everyone's getting a chance to get outside and get some sun, depending on where you are in the world. Today, we're going to go over the best practices for actually outsourcing your PCI compliance program. So just as by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Donaldson. I'm a director here at Risk 360. I lead our PCI and advisory services here. Been doing security and PCI both and PCI as well as just general advisory work in cybersecurity for quite some time now. So excited to share with you what we have today. So I guess from a contextual perspective, how did we get here? How did this conversation arise? Well, last time or in the previous webinar, we talked about the harsh reality for the harsh reality of PCI compliance, right? And that harsh reality is for merchants, PCI is a non-value add function, right? And you have to do it. There's no other option if you take card payments other than completely outsourcing all of your card payments to where you're not even the merchant of record anymore. And even then, not all the way. There's really no way of getting out of doing PCI. And it's not going to generate more revenue for you. Customers are not going to come to you specifically because you're PCI compliant. That's just the expectation. This is the same thing for payment service providers for the most part. You can lose business if you're not PCI compliant. It can hurt your bottom line, but rarely is it ever going to affect your top line in any way. So what do we do in those scenarios, right? Like how do we manage that, right? So I guess the question I asked to you is, and what we continued from last time, or what we spoke about last time, is do you want to invest in and develop a non-value add function in-house that is not core to your competitive advantage? Do you want to do something? Do you want to spend money? Do you want to source the talent, train the talent, retain the talent? Do you want to build the capabilities of something in your security program, in your compliance program, wherever it would sit, that is not going to make you more money, ultimately, right? That is not really going to help you be, that is not going to help you, retain customers or get more customers, or, but at the end of the day, can really only hurt you if you don't do it well, right? Probably not. So what can you do, right? So if you don't do it yourself, then if you had the option of letting someone else do it, and trimming a lot of the negative branches associated with building and running your own PCI compliance program, that would be appealing if that's something that that's not core to your business. So now what, right? So where do we go from here? All right. So if you said, you know what, Chris, like realistically, we have looked at it, and it's just not, PCI compliance for us is not something that we really want to invest a tremendous amount of money in becoming exceptional at, right? It doesn't get us more customers. It doesn't help us make more money, but we have to do it. So how can we, in the spirit of fit for growth, right? How can we take it from, a differentiating capability in terms of investment down to maybe more of a lights on or like a table stakes level of investment and competency for us, right? So number one, so just in terms of order of operations here of how you actually go about doing this. So number one, you have some things to do on your side before you really do anything else, right? There's some stuff you need to do, some things you need to take care of, your organization needs to take care of before you really go on to the next step. Second thing you're going to do after you get your stuff together is you're going to select a partner. We're going to talk about that in a moment, right? Then you're going to get your partner started, and then last, you're going to monitor your partner throughout the process. So let's talk about your side of things, right? So there's a lot of, so there's a couple of pieces here, right? So before you actually go about talking to anybody, there's a couple of things you need to do. Number one is you need to get your documentation in place. If you don't have anything at all, right, then you're going to want to ask your partner to participate in a 1-hour working session with you so you can walk them through your environment, your scope, how you take payments, right, what your payment landscape looks like, your current risk profile from a security perspective, so they can get an idea of what's going on. Your partner, whether you have documentation or not, or rather your partner candidates, right, the folks you're looking at actually working with, they should be amenable to this. If they're not, that's a huge red flag. But most partner candidates, I say partner candidates versus like vendors, right? Because at the end of the day, they're going to be a partner with you, whoever you choose to work with, if you go down this path. They should be amenable to having this conversation with you, to investing the time with you up front to understand what's going on. The second thing you need to get together, so after you've gotten your scope documentation together, what's going on is, what are your key timelines and dates? When are your reports due? When do you want to start? Ideally, when would you like to start doing things? Are there any major initiatives coming up? Are there any major moratoriums that you have? Is there a new product release coming up? Are you making a strategic acquisition that's going to affect things? Let's talk about timelines and dates, right? So you're beginning to open up a little bit to your partner candidate on what your future actually looks like, and what you need them to be able to accommodate. Because if you tell them, hey, I really need you to support this report that's due in 2 weeks, they may not be able to do that, and you need to know that up front, right? 2 weeks is also a very short timeline, so I mean, more realistically is a month or 6 weeks. Any of those are very, very tight. So you want to be upfront with them around all the things that you know in terms of expectations for the future, in terms of dates, right? And then the last thing you need to have prepared is your actual expectations of them. What do you need them to actually do? Because PCI as a service, right? Someone taking care of your PCI compliance program can look like, or rather exists on a spectrum of things you would expect them to do. On one end of the spectrum, which is the most involved you could possibly be, is this partner candidate, or this, whoever you're working with. They're running your cyber risk assessment, and they're doing your internal readiness assessment, and they're preparing paperwork, and they're doing your tabletops, and they're facilitating policy review. They're doing, they are doing almost as much stuff as they possibly can do on the GRC, on the governance side of things, outside of putting hands on keyboards to configure firewalls or do actual the actual firewall reviews, or do the actual user access reviews themselves, right? They obviously wouldn't know who should stay and who should go on those, or what firewall rules are good and not good. So, but outside of that, they can do a tremendous amount. On the other side of that spectrum, probably the minimum amount of service when it comes to a PCI compliance as a service product is them strictly running getting you do all the readiness assessment testing, them running getting your PCI specific paperwork in place and reviewing that and making sure it's good to go, facilitating your remediation of any gaps, making sure all the periodic PCI controls happen, and then facilitating either your external audit with interfacing with the QSA, or preparing the internal the SAQ paperwork for you. But there are many possibilities of what you could need them to do, so you need to be ready and prepared with what those things are. For bigger organizations, you're probably on them doing less, or them doing more PCI specific work and not getting their hands involved in all the other stuff. If you're a smaller organization, right, and you don't have a big security team, or you have limited resources, you may want them to do a lot more work, and that's okay. But make sure you have all that ready when you talk to them, because that's going to affect their level of effort. It's going to affect the price. It's going to affect expectations and timelines and such. That will help them serve you better. Also, have your wish list, right? Don't be afraid to tell a partner candidate what you want that's non-standard. If it's outside of those two activities, or the PCI specific work, right? Let them know. It's really important at this stage that you are open and honest about the things that you really want and need, even if it's a wish list item, even if it's not delivery necessarily, or core to delivery, right? If you want them to be available during a period of time, like during the day, that's perfectly fine. Like, voice that. Now, they may not be able to meet that requirement, but at least you've asked. And at least they had the opportunity to say, yes, we can, or no, we can't. Additionally, other things that you may want is, if you don't want to, if they bring their own tool and you don't want them to use their own tool, you want them to use your tool, tell them that as well. Again, be prepared for them to say, we can't accommodate that. And then move forward together, versus you reserving a bunch of expectations or wish list items that turn out to be, things that are very important to you down the road. Give your partner candidate an opportunity to demonstrate to you that they're either very flexible or on some things and inflexible on others, or they can accommodate this or can't accommodate that. You want to know that as you select somebody. So make sure you get that information. Make sure you get all the information that you want out of a partner candidate. So after we've gotten all of our stuff together, right? Let's talk about selecting a partner, right? So every organization has their own, we'll call it green lights and red flags, and their own RFP process, or they single source things depending on who they're working with. So let's go through a couple of green lights as it relates to selecting a partner. So this is my list for you, but I'm just gonna be very honest with you about what I would tell anybody. So number one is, if you're gonna work with somebody, make sure they are a QSA company. So QSAC stands for QSA company, right? So they are, certified by PCI to actually do assessments. Because the last thing that you want on as a part from a partner is somebody who's talking to a QSA who is not a QSA themselves currently, or has never been a QSA, or never formally done PCI, right? They weren't an ISA either, right? So because you want that knowledge on your side of the table, you want to know what the official stance is on certain things, so you can navigate things that are tricky, you can navigate nuance, you can navigate potential gaps in the future. If you don't have that on your side of the table, you're going to have difficulties in the future, with how a potential QSA would interpret things, how would the council interpret things, right? You want to resolve those questions and just work with a QSA firm, or somebody who has been a QSA relatively recently. The second thing is, you want to find someone who has a track record of actually helping companies run security compliance programs, right? So they may not have an extensive, so if they're a QSA, but they may not have, their company may not have an extensive track record of running PCI programs, but they have an extensive track record of running, ISO programs, or SOC 2 programs, or SOX programs, or ITGC, or FedRAMP, or HITRUST, or whatever it is. That's what you really need, that capability. PCI is at the end of the day still a security compliance framework. So if you have the PCI expertise and then the structure of how to actually run a security compliance program or a GRC program, you're going to be okay. But in the absence of those things, it's going to be difficult. So additionally, you want your candidate company to be a good cultural fit, right? Do you feel like they understand, kind of how y'all work? Are they highly remote themselves, as you're a highly remote company, or do they understand in-person culture or not? Are they a lot more laid back if you're laid back? Are they a lot more proper and reserved if you're more that way? Make sure it's a good cultural fit, and you like the people that you're actually talking to, because you're going to be working with them quite a bit. Your teams are going to be working with them quite a bit, and you don't want to put your teams, or you don't want to bring someone on as a partner that you would not be okay with working in your company, and working in your company in the culture as well. I will stand by this one. I do believe that partner candidates should bring their own tools, rather than relying on you to have your own tools and for them to use that. And then it puts a tremendous amount of burden on you, on the company who's trying to do PCI. Because now we have to come in, we have to configure that tool, we have to learn, we have to get access, and we have to do all that stuff, right? And we're asking you for a tremendous amount of help. So work with companies that bring their own tools to do the job. It makes things much easier. It streamlines the process. It's a lot more efficient. Make sure the candidate understands your tech stack, understands your business, your objectives, and your needs as well. So if a partner candidate doesn't understand even how your business works, or what you find important, what you don't find important, they don't understand. If you're using Kubernetes, they have no idea how Kubernetes works. That's gonna be a problem. At some point, that's going to be a problem, because you're going to have to continue to explain to them things that they don't understand. And they may make decisions that are misaligned with either your business requirements or your actual business objectives or your needs, which is going to create friction in the future. If they don't spend time up front getting to know those things, you need to understand that, or you should take note of that. And we'll get to some red flags in a second. And then the last one is that the candidate should have the ability to surge support to support your scope and needs, as well as the technical expertise required to operate in your environment, right? So we've mentioned this in the previous webinar, but I'll bring it up again. Part of the value of using an outsourced PCI compliance program partner is that you don't have to keep someone staffed all year in a role that may only require 8 months of dedicated work, or 6 months, or whatever it is. That's part of the value. So if they can't surge, though, to support your compliance season, or surge to support an effort that is needed, or do not have the technical expertise required to support your environment, then that's going to be a problem. Would caution you in those cases, right? Now I will give you maybe just a piece of, just a pro tip or something on the inside. So we are a QSA firm, right? We do this for organizations, giving you some insight into how we think, right? You may not have a QSA's dedicated time for the entire duration of your engagement, right? It's unlikely you're going to, like, dedicated time, meaning that, like, you're the only thing they're thinking about at that one point in time. So expect two things. Expect that, one, if the QSA assigned to your project or to your engagement, to your account, is going to communicate very clearly to you when you are getting dedicated time from them, and make sure you use that time accordingly. That time is very important. And separately, make sure that you understand that the QSA, though, should be watching over the program for the duration of the engagement, right? So while you may not be seeing them on the calls all the time, do expect that they are engaged on their side of the table with their team on what's going on. Expect that they are tracking major gaps, they're tracking risks to your objectives, and they are on the lookout, and that they are advocating, and they are overseeing the project to still accomplish the goal. So while you may not be seeing them and having week-long meetings with them, they should be engaged. I'm expecting that they are engaged. But I just want to make sure that everyone was clear on that, to set expectations, just because of how it tends to work with these kinds of things, right? So let's talk about some red flags, though. So the first slide was what we just talked about, was things that you should see to feel comfortable moving forward with a candidate. Let's talk about some things that, if you see them, you should feel hesitant about moving forward with a candidate. So number one is probably just the inverse of what we talked about in the other slide, is if they're not a QSA firm themselves, and if no one on the project, if no one in the candidate firm has ever been a PCI QSA or an ISA. I would say a QSA, but maybe we can be more flexible and say ISA. But if they've never done a PCI assessment before, it's going to be very difficult for them to advocate effectively on your behalf, or to oversee effectively your program to make sure it meets compliance. If they rely on you to have and run and implement all of the tooling that runs the program, right? Number three, if they quote a price to you without requesting documentation, specifically the documentation that we mentioned on the getting your stuff together slide, or having a scoping meeting with you, if they quote you a price without any of that information, that should be a red flag, because that means they're scoping your engagement with no understanding of how big your environment is, how complex your environment is, what your needs are. And so they're either going to dramatically overscope the engagement from a price perspective, or dramatically underscope the engagement. Either one is not a true, or is not a realistic, it doesn't necessarily put you in a position to be successful. I'll say that much. And I think that everyone understands why. So I guess the fourth on the list is that they say they can do the external audit for you and run your program for you. I will say there are some cases where this is possible. And I'm not saying you should say no to a candidate because of this. However, there should be additional questions if they say they can do both. Specifically run your PCI program for you and do your PCI external audit, right? They may be doing other work for you outside of running your PCI program. They may be running your ISO program, for instance. Again, I would have additional questions in those cases, but what I'm trying to indicate here is beware of organizations that say they can do it all, right? If they can do it all, then it's going to be I have seen that not work out so well for clients in the past. So that should be a red flag to investigate further on exactly where the lines are. And then lastly, the candidate does not seem, to understand your business environment, culture, technologies, anything like that. It's okay to stress test them on those, right? Once you convey those things to them in an early call or an early point, to then ask them how the plan fits into your strategic objectives, to your business plan. So let's talk about timeline now. So we talked about what the expectations are of you to be prepared to select somebody. We talked about, regardless of how you go about selecting somebody, what you need to be on the lookout for, both from a green flag, like a green light perspective, as well as a red flag perspective. What should be go for these people, or be cautious. Now let's talk about, okay, let's say you picked somebody. What should you expect from a start perspective? So this is all like very tentative timelines, and obviously estimated. Things flex up and down based off of your scope, and I'm just giving you an example, right? So for a moderate sized organization, your partner should communicate to you a clear start date for the engagement. That's where we start this whole thing. After that, expect 6 to 8, maybe more weeks on the front end, maybe 12, right? Depending on how big your environment, if you have a really big environment. Expect 6 to 8 weeks up front for them to properly scope your environment, for them to get really comfortable with the scope and get all the scope nailed down, for them to build like all the infrastructure on their side that actually runs the PCI compliance program from a tooling perspective, from a process perspective, from a documentation perspective. And then for them to get their initial, we'll call it readiness assessment or gap assessment, depending on where your organization is, to get all of those things done. That's going to take at least, for most organizations, 6 to 8 weeks. Like I said, big organizations, obviously 50% more time, maybe twice as much time. So after that's done though, expect that they're going to go into more of an a maintenance mode, right? Where they're going to be interacting with y'all, 4 to 8 hours a week, depending on what the requirements are, right? It may be more while remediation is still going on, and then kind of come down a little bit as things go into the true off season, like there's no remediation going on, or if it is, it's very, very minimal. And they're essentially monitoring the periodic controls to make sure those stay on track. To make sure those things stay on track. One point though, just to revisit it about the scope and the build initial assess portion. Expect that your QSA or the firm you're working for is going to need a lot of your time during those first 6 to 8 weeks. They will tell you exactly how much time, but if you're my client, I'm telling you to expect that we're gonna need a lot of your time during those weeks, right? We may need to be in meetings every day for those first at least 4 weeks, and then I'm gonna be meeting with your team probably every day. Someone on your team every day for those 6 to 8 weeks. Just plan on that happening. So after we've gone through that first initial effort, that 6 to 8 weeks, we're kind of in an operating mode. The next thing that happens is the certification support, which the level of effort here varies depending on if you are internally assessing yourselves, or if you are you have a QSA you're working with. So if you're internally assessing, then this is a little bit lower of an effort, right? Because it's only internal, right? There's only one party involved. Expect probably 4 weeks of, readiness assessment plus reporting. Reporting is not going to need as much time from y'all, but the readiness assessment portion is. There's going to be evidence requests. There's going to be interviews. There's going to be, other things that are going on that you need to be prepared for. So expect, in that first 6 to 8 weeks, we have a lot of effort. Then we kind of come down as we go into maintenance mode and do remediation and periodic controls, and then we come back up for 3 to 4 weeks during the internal assessment. During the internal assessment, tack on to that. If there's an external portion to this, if you have a QSA, you have a level 1 ROC. If you're a payment service provider or if you're a merchant, expect that to obviously be more than 4 weeks, as once the internal portion is done, there's the external portion as well. But ideally, this partner firm is buffering a lot of the QSA conversations and requests from you. That's kind of the point. So your level of effort may be a bit lower during those times, but the QSA and your partner's effort is still very, very high during that time. So that's the timeline of things. So now let's talk about what it actually looks like to, as we go on beyond this initial year. Okay, so we have gotten our stuff together, right? We have picked a firm. We have gotten everything off the ground. What do I do now? Right? What do I need to know about ongoing operations of things? So throughout your engagement, your PCI as a service partner should be always keeping you up to date on information that is critical, right? Their job is to sift through all of the PCI compliance information to give you whether you're the CIO or the CISO or Director of Information Security or what have you, to give you actionable information to either go remove obstacles, to get funding for remediation, to get the right resources allocated, or to tell you that everything is going fine and that there actually is no action required on your part. But they need to tell you something. They need to always be letting you know what's going on at an executive level. Yeah, so as a part of that, their job is to keep you in the loop without you having to be involved day to day, right? That is why you are hiring them to do the job. And then lastly, they need to, on an ongoing basis, always make sure that they are very clearly set expectations on what they're doing and what they're not doing. They should tell you that. If you have a problem or if you have a disagreement with what those things are, then it's your responsibility to speak up. But they should be telling you, they should be leading off and saying, here's what we're doing, here's what we're not doing, here's where we need help, here's what you need to go do. If they're not doing that for you, then that jeopardizes the program for sure. And just again, plan accordingly. They are not going to do everything for you. Like, there's some things that your partner is going to tell you that they're not going to do some things, and that's okay. Like, you need to be prepared for that. Understand that it's that's just have that expectation moving forward. So let's talk about some pro tips, right? So when I say pro tips, I mean, having done this for a while, if you were my client, or if I was telling someone who was going into look at doing this themselves, here's what I would tell you, right? To be mindful of. So during the candidate selection process, again, make the candidates tell you that they won't do something. Like, find their line. They're gonna, a lot of vendors want to tell you that they promise you the moon and the stars, or they say they do a lot of things, but they don't tell you what they don't do. And so you, or an organization, very easily assumes that they do a lot of things that they may not do, right? Because they didn't tell you what they don't do. So get them to tell you what that line is. Hey, we're not going to actually run your scans for you, right? You need to assign a person to actually run the scans. We will, review the scans. We will make sure the scan scope is appropriate for PCI, but in terms of like actually logging into Qualys or OpenVAS or whatever you use to do your internal scans. Like, we're not going to do that. You need to find someone to do that, right? That's what you're looking for, right? What are they not going to do? And then a second thing to do is ask for a time when that candidate has supported PCI for organizations similar to yours, right? Similar to yours may be scope, it may be, size, it may be complexity, it may be industry, right? There's a lot of different ways that they can, you can have a PCI environment be similar. So be prepared that, they may answer in terms of a similar kind of scope, right? They may answer in terms of similar kind of industry or similar kind of client or complexity or what have you. All those things are, all those things are valid from my perspective. And then lastly, for another pro tip is it's never, and I tell my team this year, it's never too late to set or reset expectations with your partner or with your partner organization, right? Do not let problems, things that are bothering you about either how they're working, how the engagement's going, whatever, go on for longer than a week or so. If you don't see it resolving itself within a week, then bring it up to the engagement leader. They want to know, like, if you were my client, I would want you to tell me, like, hey, we're not getting this. We were expecting this and we were not getting this. We expect this. Great. I can now do something about it. I can't do something about things I don't know about. Again, we do our best to provide the best possible service to our clients. To Risk 360, we say we like to create raving fans, and we do absolutely do our best to create raving fans. Part of that, though, is I need feedback on what's working and what's not working. Are you getting what you need? And if you're not getting something that you need that we did not plan for, we need to have that conversation as well, so that we can plan a path forward. These engagements move very quickly, especially those first 3 months, as you go plan, build, assess, and then go into remediation. And things move. So things move extremely fast. It's very easy for a little problem to turn into a big problem very quickly if it's not discussed. So treat your partner like a legitimate partner, right? Versus a vendor who's doing something for you. Treat them like a partner who's helping you accomplish a goal, who you're working with and want to retain a relationship with, if you do want to retain a relationship with them, so that they can serve you the best way possible. Let's talk lastly about pricing, right? Because you're going to get, so during that second portion where you're talking about vendors, right? You're going to get a lot of things on price. And so I saved it for the end because it is relevant. It's extremely relevant, but it's just, people think about price all different ways. I'll give you my perspective as somebody who does price these kinds of engagements out quite frequently. So remember, you are paying for value, not effort, right? If you had to, so for instance, right, if you could accomplish a job, at the end of the day, you care about getting PCI compliant, getting and maintaining PCI compliance, right, in a way that satisfies your level of quality and your level of integrity, right? So you're paying for value, not for effort. So if it takes a vendor 2,000 hours to do something, or if it takes them 10 hours to do something, at the end of the day, the value, if you're still getting a PCI compliant, either SAQ or ROC, and PCI AOC, and if the value is still there, then that's what you're paying for, not for it to take them a bunch of time, or not for it to take them a bunch of time. So again, additionally, part of the outsourcing your PCI compliance program is so you're not having to hire people to do the job. So you're not having to hire a PCI team, whether that's a manager and 1, 2, 3 associates, multiple managers, right? You're not having to hire, you're not having to pay for PCI advisory services, to help you interpret the new 4.0 controls and what meets the mark and what doesn't meet the mark. To purchase a separate pen test, right? Or to buy your own GRC tool, right? You're paying for all of that value, rather than you have to go buy it individually or build it yourself, right? So just keep that in mind as you think about pricing. Is think about the value of what you're getting versus the alternatives, versus their level of effort, right? Or compared to, rather than necessarily a level of effort that's put into it. I would strongly advise against time-based billings. I'm not sure many programs do this anymore, but it was very common historically for T&M or time and material kind of engagements when it comes to professional services. Fixed fee engagements tend to be much better for everybody involved, right? It's at least a lot more transparent. It's a lot more predictable. You can plan for things a lot better. On this side of things, it's a lot more clear. On your side of things, it's a lot more clear. So expect a fixed fee engagement versus a staff aug, right? This is not so PCI as a service or outsourcing your PCI compliance program is not a staff aug kind of engagement, the way that we're talking about it now. The way we're talking about it now is a very productized, very deliverables oriented, and kind of engagement versus somebody just around doing stuff who's on your team. If you want that, that's a separate thing, but that's not what we're talking about here. So just keep that in mind as well. I do recommend multi-year engagements if possible. In the absence of those, I strongly recommend, if you do intend on maintaining a relationship with your partner, that you let them know that you do plan on staying with them for multiple years. If there's a one-time engagement for us, it makes it a lot more difficult, right, to run the engagement, because I'm not sure if we're going to be around here next year. I'm not building anything, right? Like, so in the same way that if you hired somebody to do a job, you want them thinking about, how do I build this for the long term to be efficient, to be useful, to be sustainable, and easy for everybody to involve in the company, right? If it's a one-year engagement, I'm thinking about getting the job done now versus prioritizing, making sure the job is efficient and scalable and repeatable in the future. Just because the motivation is not necessarily there as much. So multi-year engagements are excellent ways of, one, actually having your partner be able to serve you better, in the future, and two, gives you a lot more predictability as well as who's going to be around. Because you don't hire somebody for 1 year to get you, if you were to hire a PCI person, you don't hire them for 1 year, right? You hire them, right? They're around, until they quit or they get fired or they are promoted or whatever. So just keep that in mind as well as you think about things, right? So think about value, think about, fixed fee engagements, think about multi-year engagements as well. And then from a pricing perspective, prices tend to be correlated pretty directly to, the size and complexity of your environment. I mean, just at the end of the day, and how many PCI data flows you have, how many systems you have, how many teams are going to be involved here, because that is the level of effort that's required to actually get the job done, to maintain things. But on your side of things, that's how we scope and price engagements, on what it's actually going to take to do the job. That's how we think about things. And then the last thing is, be prepared for year one to be more expensive than subsequent years, assuming that you don't make an acquisition or there's no significant changes to environment. I think year one should be more expensive than years 2 and years 3, because there's the entire build portion of things. Years 2 and years 3 should be, some percentage less expensive. I mean, obviously it's variable. That's just expectations. That's what you should be seeing when you see pricing come back from vendor candidates. So with that was the extent of the webinar. That was the extent of the content that we had for everybody. Corey, I'll pass it back over to you and ask if you have any questions or anything that we want to talk through that I didn't touch on.
Yeah, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them through the question section. We have one question to start here. Chris, what is the difference between a level 1 and a level 2 merchant when it comes to outsourcing PCI as a service?
Yeah, great question. So a level 1 merchant is going to have to do a PCI report on compliance, meaning in most cases, they're going to have to leverage an external QSA to do their to actually do their assessment. A level 2 merchant can do a self-assessment questionnaire. Level 3 merchant, level 4 merchant, level 2 merchant, they can all do a self-assessment questionnaire. How that impacts your outsourced provider is, number one, your outsourced provider, if you're a level 2 merchant, they're the ones doing the readiness assessment for your self-assessment. They're the ones drafting all that paperwork as well, and then you are still signing them. If you're a level 1 merchant, they're still doing the readiness assessments, so still plan on that happening, but they're going to advocate for you and facilitate the external assessment on your behalf. They're not doing the paperwork or signature for your assessment in that case. You're not going to, the ability for you to make risk-based decisions or actually have the final say if a control is in place or not will rest with a QSA firm versus it being with you in this case of a self-assessment. So broad strokes, if you're a level 1, prepare for that, it to be a bit higher cost, because the actual annual assessment portion is going to be a lot more involved for your provider. You are also going to have to fund your external assessment in addition to the fees associated with your outsourced PCI compliance program provider. In many cases, that's broad strokes where what the difference is.
Okay. Yeah, guys, feel free to ask questions. We have one more, Chris, and it is is there any type of hidden costs associated to building an in-house team versus just going ahead and hiring someone else to do it for us?
Sure. So if you have an in-house team, there's a couple of things you're going to have to plan for, right? So number one is your staff, right? So that's probably your biggest source of fees, right? Is your staff. So that's salary, and then also benefits on top of that, and then obviously payroll tax and all that stuff as well, employee salaries and all the stuff wrapped up in that, right? But that's a big portion of it is the staff. That may be one person, that may be 2, 3, 4, depending on how big your organization is. I know one organization right now whose PCI team is at least 6 people, including a manager. So that's probably 2 things, right? Is salary and benefits. You're going to have to pay for a pen test. PCI, external, internal segmentation pen test, more than likely, unless you have the capability already in your company, which you may, right? You very well may. Many organizations, though, choose to use a outsourced provider for pen testing because they can get a very high level of quality without having to maintain that internally themselves. The third thing is you're going to have you have to have a tool, a GRC tool, to run a PCI program. Whether that's you have your own instance of Archer or whatever it is, right? You're going to need something to run your program. So that's typically a cost, an additional cost that comes up. You're likely going to at some point need PCI professional services, just because it's very difficult for organizations at this point to keep up with the rate of change, as well as the technical, and framework specific expertise associated with PCI. So many organizations need and choose to purchase some sort of PCI advisory or consulting work to help them do 4.0 gap assessment or navigate implementation of controls for new requirements, or do a readiness assessment on something that's brand new that hasn't been in their scope historically, or help them refresh scope when they do an acquisition. So you're going to need that at some point. And then the last, I guess we'll call it hidden cost, sneaky cost, is the idle time. So when you hire a PCI resource or 2, as I mentioned earlier, there's probably 6 to 8 months of full-time work associated with that for most organizations, right? If you get very large, obviously there's things you can do year-round, but full-time, that season is not year-round, right? There are periods of time where there may not be much for them to do, maybe a third of the year. So maybe a third or fourth of the year. So that idle time is a hidden cost to you because you're paying somebody. Really, it's not, really for them not to necessarily be fully utilized, right? That's what you're looking at doing. So though it's not necessarily a direct fee or a direct line item in your budget or in a contract or anything like that, you are paying for that. So just you should be mindful of that as well.
All right, we have one last question. With PCI 4.0 coming out, do you feel like it's vital for us to start thinking about PCI as a service because there's such a shortage of people who understand 4.0?
Yes, I mean, I think that for most organizations, well, I think two things are true. I think for many organizations, they should, they should do scope reduction when it comes to PCI. So if you have a very big PCI landscape right now, you're not using point-to-point encryption, you're not using any sort of scope reduction on your e-commerce side or in the call center side, you should 100% consider and prioritize investment there to minimize the impact and burden of doing PCI 4.0. On the who's going to run it side, like once that's done, like again, I would strongly recommend having someone run it for you. There are many new controls that are a bit complicated or a bit complex. There's a lot of specific expertise, and then navigating around it from a reporting perspective as well, and the nuance there, and the requirements, restrictions, and such. It would behoove you greatly, at minimum, to have some sort of PCI or have a QSA on your side of the table, but more so to have a QSA who's helping run your PCI, who's running your PCI compliance program for you. Candidly, you probably have better things to do than into more places where that money can go that's going to make a bigger impact for your company versus trying to build it and run it yourself.
All right, that's actually all the questions. Thank you all for joining. Thanks, Chris. You did a great job today. Everyone have a great day.
Y'all take care.